Princess Illyra of the Andromeda system lived in a grand palace surrounded by the most beautiful gardens and surrounded by luxurious wealth. Yet, despite all this, she often found herself feeling empty. She was the youngest daughter of King Zoroth, ruler of the powerful Zorothian Empire, and she was known across the galaxy for her beauty and wisdom. Yet, there was a loneliness in her heart that no amount of wealth, power, or grandeur could fill. The royal palace was always filled with extravagant events. The best alien suitors from many different planets came to try to win her heart, but none of them ever caught her attention. They spoke to her in grand words and presented her with magnificent gifts, but none of them ever truly understood her. They were more interested in the idea of marrying a princess than in who she actually was. Each suitor seemed to be trying harder than the last, yet Illyra grew more distant from them. She had grown tired of the shallow conversations and empty promises. She would smile and nod politely at the suitors, but deep down, she felt that none of them truly saw her. To them, she was just a prize to be won, not a person with feelings and desires of her own. One day, while walking through the palace gardens, Illyra found herself once again lost in thought. She stared at the beautiful flowers that bloomed around her, but she didn't feel the usual joy they brought her. The wind whispered through the trees, but the sound seemed distant, like a memory she couldn't quite grasp. Her father had told her that her marriage was a matter of politics, not love. It was something she had accepted, though it felt wrong to her. Every time a new suitor arrived, she was reminded of her duty to her people, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. As Illyra walked, she stopped by a small fountain in the center of the garden. She knelt by the edge and let her fingers graze the cool surface of the water. The ripples spread across the fountain as she looked at her own reflection. Her dark green eyes gazed back at her, and for a moment, she wondered who she truly was behind the crown. Illyra, you must choose soon, her father's words echoed in her mind. The galaxy is watching. Your marriage will decide the future of our empire. The pressure weighed heavily on her. She was not just a princess, she was a symbol of power, and her marriage would determine alliances with other civilizations. But in her heart, she longed for more than just a political union. She wanted someone who would see her for who she was, not just the title she carried. Just as she was about to stand up, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find one of the palace guards walking toward her. He was a human, a strange sight in the Zorothian court, as humans were not often seen in high-ranking positions. His name was Alex, and he had been sent as part of a diplomatic mission between Earth and the Zorothian Empire. Unlike the others, Alex did not bow deeply or try to impress her with flashy gestures. He simply stood there, looking at her with curiosity, like he was seeing a person, not just a princess. Illyra, he said gently, using her first name as if they were equals. Are you all right? She was taken aback. No one had ever dared speak to her so casually. But there was something about the way he looked at her, something genuine in his eyes. I'm fine, she replied quickly, standing up. But she could feel the weight of the lie in her words. Alex seemed to sense it too, but instead of pressing her for an explanation, he smiled warmly. I can see the loneliness in your eyes. You don't have to hide it from me. Illyra was stunned. No one had ever noticed before. Her entire life had been about hiding her true feelings behind a mask of duty and responsibility. But here was this human, an outsider who somehow saw right through her. She paused, unsure of what to say. I've had many suitors. They all come, say nice things, and then leave. But none of them really understand me. They only care about what I represent, not who I am. Alex nodded thoughtfully, his expression softening. I can't pretend to understand your life, but I know what it's like to feel trapped by expectations. Maybe that's something we both have in common. Illyra looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time. Alex was not like the others. He did not speak to her out of obligation or ambition. There was no hidden agenda, no political maneuvering. He was simply being honest, and in that moment, Illyra realized how rare that was in her world. For the first time in what felt like forever, Illyra smiled. It was small, but genuine. She had found someone who saw her, not as a princess, but as a person. The connection was unexpected, yet it felt like the start of something that could change everything. Little did she know, that one meeting would mark the beginning of a journey that would lead her to question everything she had ever known about duty, love, and what it meant to be truly seen. The days that followed were filled with strange emotions for Princess Illyra. She had always been surrounded by people, but she had never felt truly seen until Alex. The human diplomat was unlike anyone she had met before. Unlike the others, he did not treat her like a distant royalty to be admired from afar. He spoke to her as if she were an equal, a person with feelings, not just a figurehead of power. Illyra found herself looking for excuses to see him again. She told herself it was for the sake of the diplomatic mission, but deep down, she knew the truth. Alex was different. He had a warmth about him that no one else seemed to possess. He didn't try to impress her with lavish gifts or flattering words. Instead, he simply offered her genuine conversation and kindness. It wasn't long before they began to talk more often. Their meetings were often brief, in the gardens or during the occasional diplomatic dinner, but each time Illyra felt more and more drawn to him. He asked questions that made her think, and in return, she found herself opening up in ways she never had before. One evening, as the two of them stood by a small fountain in the garden, the sky painted with shades of purple and orange from the setting sun, Illyra couldn't help but feel at peace. She had always loved the view from the palace garden, but tonight, it felt different. Tonight, it felt like something was shifting inside her. "I've never been outside the palace walls," she admitted, her voice soft. "I mean, not really. I've been to meetings and gatherings, but it's not the same as being free. Being outside, away from the expectations, away from everyone watching you." Alex smiled, his eyes thoughtful. "I can imagine how that must feel. I've traveled a lot in my life, but sometimes, it's not the same when you're doing it because you have to, not because you want to." Illyra looked at him curiously. "Do you ever get homesick?" "Of course," Alex replied, his voice filled with sincerity. "But that's the price of seeing new places, meeting new people. You get to experience so much, but it's never without sacrifice." For a moment, they both stood in silence, the sound of the fountain's water filling the space between them. Illyra realized she had never thought about her own life that way. She had always felt that she was the one who had to sacrifice, that her life was not her own. But here was Alex, speaking of sacrifice in a way that made her feel less alone. As their conversations grew, so did their connection. Illyra began to look forward to seeing Alex more and more. His presence became a comforting reminder that there was more to life than politics and duty. One afternoon, after a particularly long meeting with her father's council, Illyra found herself wandering the palace halls, lost in her thoughts. The constant pressure of being the perfect princess weighed heavily on her. She knew that her marriage was a political tool, a way to form alliances, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she deserved more. Her thoughts were interrupted when she bumped into Alex, who was coming down the hallway. He looked at her with a smile that immediately lightened the weight in her chest. "Princess," Alex greeted her with a small bow, though it was more respectful than formal. "You look deep in thought." Illyra offered him a faint smile. "I've been thinking about my future, and what it means for my people." Alex raised an eyebrow. "It sounds like a heavy burden to carry." "It is," she replied honestly. "But what can I do? I am a princess. My life is not my own. I must marry for the good of the empire. Do you want that?" Alex asked gently, his voice filled with curiosity and concern. Illyra's heart skipped a beat. The question felt so simple, Yet no one had ever asked her before. All her life, people had told her what was expected of her, what she must do for her people. But no one had ever asked if she truly wanted it. She hesitated, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions. "I don't know," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never really thought about it. I've always been told what's best for me. But now I wonder if there's more. More than just duty. More than just being a pawn in someone's game." Alex's gaze softened, and he took a step closer, his expression kind but respectful. "I can't imagine what that's like. But I know one thing for sure: no one should ever feel like a pawn. You deserve more than that, Illyra. You deserve to make your own choices." Her breath caught in her throat. His words hit her harder than she had expected. In a world where everyone wanted something from her, Alex was the only one who didn't want anything at all except for her to be happy. For a brief moment, Illyra felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she allowed herself to dream of a life that wasn't bound by the chains of royal duty. As they continued to talk, Illyra couldn't shake the feeling that Alex had come into her life for a reason. He was not just a diplomat, a human among aliens. He was a person who saw her for who she truly was: someone worthy of happiness, not just a symbol to be used. And with that thought, Illyra realized that her life, her future, might not be as set in stone as she had once believed. Princess Illyra found herself thinking about Alex more often than she ever expected. Every time they met, whether by the fountain, in the garden, or during brief moments in the palace halls, she felt something stir inside her, a feeling she had long buried under the weight of her royal responsibilities. She had always been taught that duty came first, that her heart should belong to her people, and that her life was not her own. But Alex was different. His presence was calming, and his words were sincere. He didn't treat her as a prize to be won or a symbol of power. He simply saw her as Illyra. The more they talked, the more Illyra felt an unexpected connection growing between them. Alex never pressed her to share her feelings, yet she found herself revealing things she had never spoken about before. They talked about their worlds, his home on Earth and hers on Zorth, and what it meant to be from such different places. Despite the distance between their cultures, they found common ground in their understanding of what it felt like to be isolated in a world full of expectations. One afternoon, after a long day of meetings with her father's council, Illyra slipped away to the gardens, looking for a moment of peace. She didn't have to say anything to Alex. He seemed to know when she needed to talk and when she needed silence. He was already waiting for her by the fountain when she arrived. The sky was painted with hues of pink and gold as the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the garden. "Even the sky looks different when you don't have to worry about the future," Illyra said softly, taking a seat beside him. Alex smiled but didn't respond immediately. He simply nodded, understanding the weight of her words. They sat in comfortable silence, the sound of the fountain's water the only noise between them. For the first time in ages, Illyra didn't feel like she was carrying the burden of her kingdom on her shoulders. "You know," Alex finally spoke, his voice gentle, "I've seen a lot of things in my life, but I've never met someone quite like you." Illyra looked at him, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "What do you mean? Most people wear a mask, even if they don't know it. They hide behind their titles or their roles in life. But you don't hide who you are. You don't try to be someone else just to please others. It's rare." Illyra was taken aback by his words. She had never thought of herself as someone who didn't hide behind her title, but Alex's words made her stop and think. She had always been so focused on fulfilling her royal duties that she never considered whether she was truly showing who she was. But with him, she didn't need to pretend. There was no crown, no court, no expectations. There was only her Illyra. "I never thought anyone would see me like that," she admitted quietly, her voice soft. I've spent so much of my life trying to be the perfect princess, the perfect heir to the throne. I've been so focused on what others expect from me that I forgot what it means to just be myself. Alex's expression softened as he turned to face her. You don't need to be perfect, Illyra. No one is. You deserve to live your life, to make your own choices. I can't imagine how hard it must be to be in your position, to have your every move watched and scrutinized by everyone. Illyra sighed, leaning back against the stone edge of the fountain. The weight of his words was both comforting and heavy. She had spent so much of her life pretending to be what everyone expected, but in that moment, she realized just how much she longed for freedom. I've always been told what I should do, who I should be with, how I should act. But what if I don't want any of that? What if I want something different? What if I want to choose my own path? Her voice wavered with uncertainty, but there was a spark of something hope, perhaps that she had never allowed herself to feel before. Alex's eyes softened with understanding. He reached out and placed a hand gently on hers, offering comfort without saying a word. Illyra felt a warmth spread through her at his touch, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly seen. Maybe it's time you started choosing what's best for you, Alex said softly. Illyra's heart raced at his words. She had spent so long trying to please others that she had forgotten what it felt like to live for herself. The thought of breaking free from her royal duties was both terrifying and thrilling. Could she really make a choice for herself? Was it possible to live outside of the expectations of her people? I don't know if I can, Illyra whispered, her gaze dropping to their joined hands. But you make me believe that I can. For a moment, the world outside the garden faded away. There was no royal palace, no advisors, no political schemes. There was only Illyra and Alex, two people from different worlds, sharing a connection that neither of them had expected. Alex smiled, a soft, genuine smile that made Illyra's heart skip a beat. Then maybe we'll find out together. In that moment, Illyra knew that things would never be the same. Her life was about to change, and no matter what the future held, she knew she wasn't alone. Alex had shown her that there was more to life than duty and expectations, and for the first time in years, she felt the stirrings of hope for something more. Something real. Their journey was just beginning. Princess Illyra's life had never felt more complicated. The connection she had with Alex was undeniable, but it was also dangerous. In a world governed by politics and duty, emotions were often seen as a weakness, and Illyra knew that the bond she shared with the human diplomat was beginning to attract unwanted attention. The palace had always been a place of tension, where alliances were built and broken with the flip of a coin. But now, the tension felt different. Whispers in the halls, the subtle glances of advisors, and the cold, calculating looks from the alien suitors who had once courted her all pointed to the same conclusion: Illyra was no longer the obedient princess they had once known. She was a problem that needed to be dealt with. One evening, after a particularly tense meeting with her father, King Zoroth, Illyra retreated to her favorite spot in the palace gardens. The weight of the day's discussions pressed heavily on her shoulders. Her father had been less than pleased with her recent behavior, her refusal to entertain the suitors, her growing closeness to Alex, and her unwillingness to follow the traditional path of royal duty. Illyra, you are disappointing the Empire, her father had said, his voice filled with disappointment. Your actions will weaken the Zorothian throne. If you do not choose a suitable suitor soon, the consequences will be dire. The other nations will see us as weak. Her heart had sunk at his words. She had always respected her father, but she couldn't help feeling that he valued the empire more than he valued her. It was as if her happiness didn't matter, only the political advantage she could bring through marriage. As Illyra walked through the gardens, her thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice calling her name. She turned to see Alex approaching, his usual calm expression on his face. Princess, he greeted her with a respectful nod. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Illyra managed a small smile. "No, Alex. I'm glad you came." Alex stepped closer, his eyes scanning her face with concern. "You don't look well. Is everything all right?" Illyra sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Everything is a mess," she admitted, her voice tinged with frustration. "My father is angry with me. The court is angry with me. Everyone expects me to marry someone I don't care about, and I can't keep pretending that it's the right thing to do." Alex stood beside her, his presence comforting. "You don't have to do this, Illyra. You don't have to follow a path that makes you unhappy. There's more to life than pleasing everyone else." She shook her head. "I wish it were that simple. I have a duty to my people, to my father, to the empire. If I don't marry for political reasons, I risk losing everything: my family, my throne, my future. But if I do marry for the sake of duty, I risk losing myself." Alex was quiet for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. Then, he turned to face her. "You have a choice, Illyra. You always have a choice. No one can force you into something you don't want. You deserve to live a life that makes you happy, not one that's dictated by others." Illyra looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. His words were a lifeline, pulling her from the suffocating weight of duty. But even as the warmth of his encouragement filled her, the harsh reality of her situation settled in. The political storm was coming, and it would not be easy to weather. "I know you're right," Illyra said quietly. "But it's not just about me. It's about my people, my kingdom. If I choose to live for myself, it could tear everything apart." Alex reached out and gently took her hand. "You're not alone in this, Illyra. You have more power than you realize. And you don't have to face it all by yourself." His touch was a grounding force, offering her a sense of comfort that she hadn't felt in a long time. Yet, despite the warmth she felt from his presence, she couldn't escape the reality that the political pressure was mounting. The next morning, Illyra was summoned to the royal council. Her father was waiting for her, surrounded by advisors and officials, all of whom wore expressions of concern. She knew what this meeting was about. "Illyra," King Zareth began, his voice stern. "We cannot afford to let your personal feelings get in the way of the Empire's future. The other factions are beginning to question our stability. If you continue to reject the suitors we've arranged for you, there will be consequences. Do you understand?" Illyra's heart raced. She could feel the weight of her father's words pressing down on her. She had never wanted to disappoint him, but she also knew that she could no longer live a life dictated by political alliances. "I understand, father," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "But I cannot marry someone just to secure the Empire's future. I want more than that. I want to be with someone who sees me for who I am, not just as a tool for political gain." Her father's eyes narrowed. "You are a princess, Illyra. You are not just a person. Your life is not your own. Your duty is to the throne and to the Empire. If you fail in this, there will be consequences." The words stung, but Illyra stood her ground. She had made a choice. She couldn't go back now. "I will not be controlled by tradition, father," she said, her voice firm. "I will not sacrifice my happiness for the sake of politics." The council room fell silent. Her father's expression was unreadable, but Illyra knew that she had just made a dangerous declaration. She had chosen to stand up for herself, but it was a choice that would change everything. The storm was coming, and Illyra would have to face it head on. But she knew, deep in her heart, that she was ready. The days following Illyra's bold declaration were filled with uncertainty. The royal court buzzed with whispers, and her father's anger grew stronger with each passing hour. Illyra had expected resistance, but she hadn't anticipated how fiercely her decision would shake the foundations of the empire. The walls of the palace felt like they were closing in on her. Illyra had refused all of her suitors, choosing to follow her heart instead of her father's commands. She had declared that her marriage would be her own choice, not a political tool. Her father had tried to reason with her, explaining the importance of securing alliances through marriage, but Illyra stood firm. She knew that if she followed the path of duty, she would lose herself in the process. Despite the tension in the air, there was a small part of Illyra that felt lighter. For the first time in her life, she had made a decision for herself, without the weight of her crown or the expectations of others bearing down on her. But the cost of that decision was becoming clearer every day. Her father, King Zoroth, summoned her to his chambers one evening. The palace was unusually quiet, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for what would come next. Illyra walked through the grand corridors, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew this meeting would change everything. As she entered her father's chambers, the door closed behind her with a heavy thud. King Zoroth stood by the large window, staring out at the darkening sky. His posture was stiff, his expression unreadable. "Father," Illyra began softly, but he didn't turn to face her. "Illyra," he said in a low, controlled voice. "Do you understand the consequences of your actions?" Illyra swallowed, trying to steady her emotions. "I understand that you don't agree with me. But I can't live a life that isn't my own." King Zoroth turned to face her, his eyes hard. "You are the future of this empire. Your decisions affect not just you, but the entire galaxy. If you refuse to follow the path set for you, you risk everything. You risk the stability of the empire, your own place in history, and the safety of our people." "I can't be the person you want me to be," Illyra replied, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've spent my entire life doing what was expected of me. I've lived according to the rules and duties of a princess, but I've never been allowed to choose my own path. I can't keep pretending that I'm okay with it." Her father's gaze softened slightly, but it was clear he wasn't ready to accept her decision. "You are the only heir to the throne. Your marriage is the key to securing the empire's future. It's not about what you want, Illyra. It's about what's best for our people." Illyra felt a pang in her chest. She loved her people, but she couldn't continue sacrificing her happiness for them. She had already given up so much of her life to fulfill the role of princess. The thought of giving up her heart, too, was unbearable. "I know my duty," Illyra said, her voice quiet but firm. "But I will not marry someone just because it's what's expected of me. I want to choose my own life, even if it means facing the consequences." Her father's face hardened, and for a moment, Illyra feared that she had gone too far. "If you continue down this path," King Zoroth said coldly, "there will be no turning back. You will lose the support of the court, the alliances we've worked so hard to build. Your decision will have repercussions, not just for you, but for your people." Illyra took a deep breath. She had known the stakes, and she had made her choice. "I understand the consequences, father. But I won't sacrifice my happiness to uphold an old tradition. I need to live my own life." The silence between them was heavy. King Zoroth stared at his daughter, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and regret. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter now. "You are making a grave mistake, Illyra. But if this is truly the path you've chosen, then you must be prepared to face the consequences alone." Illyra nodded, her heart heavy but resolute. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she also knew that she couldn't go back. She had taken the first step toward her own future, even if it meant standing against her father, her family, and the entire empire. The next few days were filled with tension. The court reacted as Illyra had expected. Her refusal to follow tradition was met with outrage, disbelief, and even betrayal. The once cordial relationship between the royal family and the other factions began to sour. Diplomats from other planets began to question the Zorothian Empire's stability, and whispers of rebellion spread through the palace. But amidst the chaos, Illyra found a sense of clarity. She knew that Alex, the human diplomat, was the only one who truly understood her. He had always been supportive, never asking her to choose between duty and happiness. With him by her side, Illyra felt a glimmer of hope. She had defied tradition, yes, but she had also found the courage to choose her own path. One evening, as Illyra sat alone in her chambers, staring out at the stars, a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. Illyra, Alex's voice was soft but filled with warmth. She turned to see him standing in the doorway, his presence comforting in the midst of the storm she was facing. "I'm ready to face the consequences," Illyra said, her voice steady. "But I'm not doing it alone." Alex smiled, stepping forward and offering her his hand. "Then we'll face it together." In that moment, Illyra knew that no matter what came next, she had made the right choice. She had defied tradition, followed her heart, and found the one person who truly saw her for who she was. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in her life, Illyra felt ready to face it with courage and hope. The tension in the palace had reached its peak. Illyra had made her stand, rejecting the suitors and the political expectations of her father and the royal court. In doing so, she had become a symbol of defiance and rebellion against the traditions that had shaped the Zarathian Empire for centuries. But with every action came a reaction, and the court's reaction was swift and unforgiving. The whispers grew louder, and the courtiers who had once admired Illyra now turned their backs on her. The empire's stability was being questioned by foreign dignitaries, and King Zaratha's authority was slipping. Illyra could feel the weight of her decision bearing down on her, but she refused to back down. One morning, the royal council summoned her to the throne room. The heavy doors creaked open as Illyra walked in, her head held high. Her father sat at the far end of the room, his expression cold and unreadable. Around him, the council members stood in tense silence, their faces a mix of concern and suspicion. "Illyra," her father began, his voice firm. "You have defied the traditions of this kingdom. You have turned away the suitors who could have strengthened our alliances. You have made a mockery of your duty as princess." Illyra took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been preparing for this moment, but facing her father's anger was still difficult. She refused to let her emotions show. "I have not mocked my duty, father," she replied steadily. "I am still the princess, and I still care deeply for my people. But I cannot live a life dictated by political alliances and traditions that no longer make sense. I will not marry someone I do not choose, just to fulfill a role." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, the throne room was silent. Illyra could feel the eyes of the council members on her, their judgment clear. But then, one of the councillors, an older man named Lord Vexer, stepped forward. "Illyra," he said, his voice low but commanding, "you have brought shame upon this family. You have caused our empire to falter. If you insist on rejecting your royal duty, we must take matters into our own hands. A decision must be made, and if you refuse to follow the tradition of choosing a suitor, then we will put you to the test." A murmur ran through the room. Illyra's heart skipped a beat. A test? What kind of test? She had always known the court would push back against her decision, but she hadn't expected this. "What kind of test?" Illyra asked, her voice firm but filled with uncertainty. Lord Vexer looked at her with a mixture of pity and disdain. "The court will hold a series of challenges, a test of your character and your worthiness as a ruler. You will face each challenge, and if you fail, you will lose the right to make your own choice in marriage. You will marry the suitor chosen for you, as tradition dictates." Illyra felt a wave of shock wash over her, but she quickly regained her composure. She had made her choice. She wouldn't back down now. "I accept," she said without hesitation. Her father's eyes flashed with anger, but he didn't stop her. The council had spoken, and Illyra knew there was no turning back now. She would face the challenges, no matter what they were. She had to prove that her decision was not a mistake. Over the next few days, the palace prepared for the challenges. Illyra spent hours training, both physically and mentally, preparing for whatever trials the court had in store. Alex, ever supportive, stood by her side, offering advice and encouragement. He had always believed in her, even when she doubted herself. "Don't let them make you doubt who you are," Alex said one evening, as they sat together in the palace garden. "You know what's right for you. These tests may be about tradition, but they can't take away your strength." Illyra smiled at him, grateful for his support. She had never felt more certain about anything in her life. No matter what the court threw her way, she would face it with courage. She would prove that she was more than just a princess bound by duty. She was Illyra, a woman who could make her own choices. The first challenge came the following week. The council had chosen a physical test, a series of trials designed to test her strength, agility, and endurance. Illyra had always been skilled in combat and physical training, but the pressure of the court's expectations weighed heavily on her. The arena was filled with people from all over the empire, the crowd's eyes fixed on Illyra as she stepped into the center of the ring. Her heart raced, but she pushed the nerves aside. This was her chance to show everyone that she was more than just a political pawn. The first trial was a test of strength, where Illyra had to lift a heavy stone and carry it across the arena. The task was difficult, but Illyra gritted her teeth and pushed through the pain. She could hear the crowd murmuring, and she knew that every eye was on her. With one final effort, she hoisted the stone over her shoulder and crossed the finish line. The crowd erupted into applause, and Illyra couldn't help but feel a rush of pride. She had done it. She had proven that she was strong enough to face whatever challenges came her way. The second trial was a test of strategy and wit. Illyra had to outsmart a group of skilled opponents in a game of tactics and logic. It was more difficult than she had anticipated, but she used her intelligence and quick thinking to outmaneuver her opponents. By the end of the trial, she stood victorious once again. One by one, Illyra faced each challenge with determination and strength. With each victory, she felt more confident in her decision. She was proving herself not only to the court, but to herself. Finally, after the last challenge was completed, Illyra stood before the council once again. Her father's gaze was intense, but there was a flicker of something, perhaps respect, in his eyes. "Illyra," King Zorth said, his voice quieter than before, "you have passed the trials. You have shown that you are worthy of making your own choice." Illyra stood tall, her heart pounding with both relief and pride. She had done it. She had defied tradition and faced the court's challenges head-on. She had proven that she was more than just a princess, she was a woman capable of shaping her own future. And now, the future was hers to choose. The air in the throne room felt thick with anticipation. The final challenge had been completed, and now Illyra stood before the royal council, her father, and the gathered diplomats. The silence was almost unbearable, as if the entire empire was holding its breath. Illyra had passed every trial, proving her strength, her intelligence, and her unwavering resolve. Yet, the real test was yet to come. Her father, King Zorth, stood before her, his gaze sharp and unreadable. The council members flanked him, their faces a mix of curiosity and wariness. "Illyra," King Zorth began, his voice heavy, "you have completed the trials. You have proven that you are more than capable of leading. But there is one final decision to make. The question that has lingered over the empire since you rejected the suitors is this: who will you choose to be your partner, your equal, and the future ruler by your side?" Illyra felt the weight of the question settle on her shoulders. It was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when she could finally make the choice that would define her future. The room was silent, all eyes on her, waiting for her answer. For a long moment, Illyra didn't speak. She glanced at the faces around her, the counselors, her father, and the other dignitaries who had come from distant worlds to witness this moment. But her gaze soon drifted to the one person who had stood by her through it all, Alex. He was standing at the back of the room, his eyes locked with hers, a quiet support in his gaze. He had been there when she felt unsure, when the weight of her decision seemed too much to bear. He had never once tried to sway her, never once asked her to choose him. But he had always been there, offering her the courage to stand strong. In that moment, Illyra knew the answer. The decision was hers, and she didn't have to choose between love and duty. She could have both. She could build a future based on the choices she made, not the ones forced upon her. "I choose Alex," Illyra said, her voice strong and clear, carrying through the throne room. The room went still. A few gasps could be heard, but Illyra's heart remained steady. She looked at her father, who stood silent, his expression unreadable. The council members exchanged uncertain glances, but Illyra did not falter. King Zoratha's gaze shifted between his daughter and the human diplomat. "Alex," he said, his voice calm but tinged with disbelief. "A human? A foreigner? You would choose him to be your partner?" Illyra nodded, her gaze unwavering. "Yes, father. I choose Alex because he sees me for who I am, not for the crown I wear. He respects my decisions, my strengths, and my flaws. He understands that we are not defined by our titles or our bloodlines, but by our choices and actions." The room remained silent, as if the words had yet to sink in. But Illyra didn't care. She had made her choice, and it was the one that felt right. She was no longer just a princess bound by duty. She was a woman with the power to shape her own destiny. For a long time, King Zorath said nothing. Illyra could feel the weight of his disappointment, but there was something else there too, something that she couldn't quite place. Finally, he spoke. "You have chosen a difficult path, Illyra," he said quietly. "But it is your path to choose." Illyra's heart raced as she met his gaze. For the first time, she saw a flicker of something other than anger in his eyes. Was it acceptance? Maybe. Or perhaps it was simply resignation. The council members looked at one another, unsure of how to proceed. Finally, Lord Vexer, the elder counselor, stepped forward. "Illyra has proven her strength, her character, and her resolve," he said, his voice steady. "We may not agree with her choice, but we cannot deny her right to make it. If the princess has chosen her path, then it is our duty to support it." One by one, the other counselors nodded in agreement. The decision was made. Illyra had won. Her father's gaze softened, and for the first time, he looked at her as more than just a princess. He looked at her as a person, as a woman who had made her own decision and stood by it. "I may not fully understand your choice, Illyra," King Zorath said quietly. "But I will respect it. You have proven that you are more than capable of ruling, and perhaps, this will be the beginning of a new era for our empire." A weight seemed to lift from Illyra's shoulders as she heard her father's words. The tension in the room faded, replaced by a sense of relief and hope. She had fought for her future, and now she could embrace it without fear. As Illyra turned to Alex, her heart swelled with emotion. He had always believed in her, even when she doubted herself. She took a step toward him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "We did it," she said softly, her voice filled with a mix of wonder and joy. Alex smiled, his eyes filled with pride and love. Together. In that moment, Illyra knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would face them with Alex by her side. They had chosen each other, and together, they would build a future that was truly their own. And as the sun set over the Zorathian Empire, Illyra felt a sense of peace she had never known before. The future was uncertain, but it was hers to shape. She was no longer just a princess bound by tradition. She was a woman, free to choose her own destiny, and with Alex by her side, she knew she was ready to face whatever came next.